Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be talking about the insulation of Donald Trump, at least when it comes to his messaging and the people around him is trying to stay consistent with what he is saying. This article actually comes from the Dispatch, and it's a pretty interesting one. We know that they are very anti-Trump, so I would say take it with a grain of salt, but that doesn't mean there's not something to it. And, of course, we will end today with our Daily Delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump into our daily debate. So, is Trump an egomaniac? I feel like we would be silly to say anything else, but also maybe we misjudged him. Maybe I misjudged him. Maybe everybody misjudged him. Maybe he's not. I want to know what people think. I want to know if he's gotten better, worse. Throw it down there in the comment section. It's a very general question, but I'm sure there's going to be varying answers. So throw it down there. All right. So with that, the article from the Dispatch, the headline reads, "When the truth is simple, but being truthful is complicated." So for those of you who are not caught up, the Ukraine-Russia sort of dealio that Donald Trump is trying to put together. He's trying to negotiate something, and it's basically his team, his negotiating team, and Russia and Saudi Arabia. Ukraine has been left out of the negotiating process. Though we are seemingly fighting for them, or at least some people would argue that we are making sure that they are represented, that they will actually come out of this situation better, that the United States is trying to protect democracy compared to an authoritarian regime. All those sort of things may be true, but Donald Trump is coming out and saying things like, oh, well, actually, Ukraine started it. Ukraine was the aggressor. Ukraine could have done this. Ukraine could have done that. Vladimir Zelensky is a dictator. They're not holding elections, blah, 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 blah. And some people are saying, well, okay, this is him. This is Donald Trump parroting Putin's talking points, which, that's fair enough. I guess you could say that. But also, I think that more importantly, it's not actually about whether or not Putin would say these sort of things. It's about the seismic shift in the perspective, because whether or not Putin would say these sort of things matters less than why Donald Trump is going. The matters less as to why Donald Trump is okay with saying these sort of things. And that's because there has been a underlying ethos that Ukraine is not the problem, that Ukraine is our democratic ally, that Ukraine is all holy, all good there. And obviously there's been discussions about losing possible arms shipments and some things to that effect. There's corruption when we were sending them weapons. But the narrative has been that Ukraine is all good, Putin is all bad. And while Donald Trump isn't coming out and saying, yes, Putin is the best, he is a person who is naturally antithetical. He is naturally contradictory, and he wants to push back against this idea that, and this is my psychoanalysis of him, so maybe that's not fair, but I think it's true. I think that this is the wisdom in Washington, and he wants to push back and say, no, actually, that's not true. He's a little bit of a contrarian. He doesn't want to use the traditional wisdom. He wants to do something a little bit unique. But this puts some of his advisors and some of his employees in a very peculiar situation, like Mr. Pete Hegseth. Quote, "This is a good illustration of the difference between a complicated question." Oh, let me actually read the quote itself at the beginning, and then we'll read his Jodberg's commentary afterwards. Quote, "Lawless invasion of Ukraine." Fox News Sunday host Shannon Beam pressed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on whether it's fair to say that Russia's attack was unprovoked. Hegseth responded that it's fair to say it's a very complicated situation, end quote. Is it a fairly complicated situation? I understand that you could really frame it as a NATO expansionary issue, and Russia is completely justified in their actions there, but then that would be to take away agency from Russia and say, no, it's just because of what we did in NATO and us trying to expand into Ukraine and bringing on more NATO states and expanding to the east. That's not necessarily fair. I mean, guess what? Just like if you get bullied, let's put it this way, an analogy that makes it a lot simpler. If you get bullied you can choose how you respond to said bullying. Do you cower? Do you fight? Now, it may feel really, really cruddy to do one or the other. And you may not want to stand up for yourself, but ultimately, you do have some agency in that situation. You can't control what the other person's going to do, but you can control how you're going to respond. I'm sure all the people have understood this and have heard this trope, or more importantly, this piece of wisdom that their parents or anybody may have provided for them. So to pretend as though, oh, well, actually, no, it's because of NATO's expansion that Putin had to. No, Putin had agency. He did invade Ukraine. We were, to some degree, trying to orchestrate things in Ukraine to actually be in the favor of us and NATO, and by us, I mean the United States, but that doesn't necessarily justify any actions. And the guess who actually went across the border first in this situation? Russia. So even if you want to go through all the technicalities, you cannot even try to pretend that Russia was not actually the first aggressor, that they were the one that went into Ukraine. Now, the word unprovoked, maybe you could make an argument about that, but no, let's be clear. For the most part, this is all on Russia. There are a few exceptions, and once again, I can talk about the NATO expansionary stuff all day, but that doesn't mean they don't have agency. They're the one that decided to go across the border. Putin is the one that decided, hey, I'm going to try to get rid of this U.S. influence in Ukraine rather than possibly changing tactics. He could have very well tried to open up trade agreements, which he did for a long time. They already had stealth operations in order to get their people elected. So lots of different options. But the point being that whether or not we actually want to embrace either of those technicalities, the fact that Pete Hegseth, the man who Donald Trump handpicked for this situation and was on TV and basically said, oh, well, it's complicated. No, it's complicated to a degree, but when it comes to who is the aggressor here, it is not complicated whatsoever. But because Donald Trump is out there saying something contradictory, the Republicans, the people who are in his administration, the people who want to support him, they all have to be silent. They all have to stay in line. They have to toe his line, which is fair enough. When you have a head of a party that's strong and powerful and can really ruin any chances of your future political success simply by tweeting out something, it makes some degree of sense to be self-protectionist or self-interested in these sort of situations. But I also think that Dave Goldberg brings up another really important issue here. So we're going to go to that quote. Quote, but as repugnant as I find the moral and intellectual corruption driving Republicans' collective decision to lie to protect Trump's ego and avoid the wrath of his fans, it's worth keeping in mind that such corruption is a feature of politics more generally. Moreover, Trump's success is corrupting our politics relies on the widespread view that his critics are corrupt. In recent years, Democrats have talked themselves into a kind of cul-de-sac by agreeing to enforce false pettiness about everything from identity politics to Israel to inflation, end quote. And I think that's actually very astute of our author here, which is politics is naturally a game of coming around who is popular. And that sounds a little bit weird, but when I say coming around who is popular, very often there are people that are able to touch and reach out to, and when I say touch, I mean touch the hearts of, touch the minds of, but there are people who are able to stoke something inside of citizens and people in our society. And when they are able to touch something special and really unify a movement behind them, of course, everybody who is outside that movement or wants to be a part of said movement or is adjacent to said movement is going to want to be in their favor. They don't necessarily want to push back too much. They think that this is a mandate from the people, from, in some cases, from God. So it's very astute that this is something that Trump is highlighting in our politics and shows us where the gap is. That doesn't necessarily mean that he is the problem itself. Our willingness and want to praise people, to have people above us who are we idealize and we lift up on pedestals, that is our flaw as human beings, at least in this case. And that is actually a very fascinating thing. Well, of course, we're going to not go into it today because that could be a whole separate issue. But something that I would at least consider. Maybe go read the article. It'll be linked in the description below that like and subscribe button. But with that, let's jump into our daily delight. This one comes from Animals Around the Globe. Cute fluffy cat helps baby take first steps. And yes, the video is just as adorable as you would think. The link will also be in the description below the like and subscribe button. If you want to check out the podcast that comes out on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that is going to be right here, YouTube channel, RSS feed on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine. And if you want to get the 6 and 6, which is 6 stories from around the world in 6 minutes or less, come back on Tuesday and Thursday, or just follow the Twitter handle at Your Daily Flip, where I post links to them every single day. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.